Right now, in a glass case in Berlin's Neues Museum, sits a wooden face millions of people have photographed. It's Queen Tiye, grandmother of Tutankhamun, carved 3,300 years ago. Everyone sees the same thing: tired eyes, a downturned mouth, a tall feathered crown. But that crown is not the one the sculptor first made. Put this head through a CT scan, and a second headdress appears underneath. Silver, with a gold cobra at the brow. Someone in her family covered her first crown and built another on top. We can see what they buried. We still can't agree why. So here's what the scan actually found, because it's stranger than the label in front of the case lets on. The head is small, only about 22 centimeters tall as it's mounted today, carved from yew, a dense dark wood. On the outside, Tiye wears a cap of tiny blue and gold beads, arranged to look like a rounded wig, and above it, a heavy crown of cow horns, a sun disk, and 2 tall feathers. Those beads are faience, a glazed ceramic the Egyptians prized for its shine, and the whole surface was built to catch the light. That is the version the world knows. But the computed tomography images, the same kind of CT scan a hospital uses, cut straight through the wood and the surface, and underneath the beads, they showed something else. Wrapped around the head, hidden under layers of linen, was an original headdress made of silver. Across the front of it sat a gold uraeus, the rearing cobra that marked Egyptian royalty at the brow, and in her ears, gold earrings, covered over by the later cap. Now here is a detail most people miss. In ancient Egypt, silver was actually rarer and often more valuable than gold, because Egypt had gold mines but almost no native silver, so a silver crown was a genuinely precious object in its own right. And they buried it anyway. Covering it was not a quick patch job either. Someone had to wrap the silver in linen, set hundreds of individual faience beads by hand, and mount a whole new crown on top, all without harming the face underneath. That is slow, deliberate work, the kind you only do when the change really matters to you. There is a quiet irony to where this head sits, too. It stands in the same Berlin museum, sometimes only rooms away, as the most photographed Egyptian object on Earth, the painted bust of Nefertiti. And Nefertiti was Tiye's own daughter-in-law, the wife of Tiye's son. Crowds line up around the block for Nefertiti. Most of them walk straight past Tiye. And yet it is the smaller, plainer head of the older woman that is actually hiding a second headdress under its skin. None of this is a guess or a legend. The imaging was published by the Egyptologist Dorothea Arnold in a 1996 Metropolitan Museum book called The Royal Women of Amarna, and the caption under the scan says it plainly, that it shows the wooden head of Queen Tiye, without its later head cover, showing a silver headdress and gold ornaments. So the face in Berlin carries 2 crowns, the one we see, and the one underneath that somebody deliberately hid. And the only reason we know any of this is that nobody had to break the head open to find out. For most of the last century, the silver crown under the surface was simply invisible. You could not see it, and you could not go looking without destroying the very object you were studying, peeling a queen's face apart to check what was underneath. That is the quiet power of a CT scan. It reads density, so metal, wood, linen, and ceramic each show up as separate layers on the screen, and the machine can map a hidden headdress without a single scratch. The same hospital technology that checks a broken bone is what let researchers look straight through Tiye's later crown and see the first one still sitting there, without ever touching the surface. That hidden crown only gets stranger when you realize who Tiye was, because she is not a minor figure you can quietly rework and forget. Tiye was the great royal wife of Amenhotep III, one of the most powerful pharaohs of Egypt's 18th dynasty, ruling at the very height of the empire's wealth. She was his queen for nearly 4 decades. She was the mother of the pharaoh who became Akhenaten, the king who tried to erase Egypt's old gods. And she was the grandmother of Tutankhamun, the boy king whose tomb made headlines around the world. That is 3 of the most famous names in all of ancient Egypt, and Tiye sits at the center of them, as wife, mother, and grandmother. What makes her stranger still is where she came from, because Tiye was not born royal. Her parents were a couple named Yuya and Tuya, and their own nearly intact tomb was found in the Valley of the Kings. So we know their faces too. And yet a commoner-born woman ended up with power that queens almost never held. Early in his reign, Amenhotep III issued a series of large commemorative scarabs, a kind of official announcement carved in stone and sent across the kingdom, and one of them declares his marriage to Tiye and names her parents outright, while stating that she is the wife of a king whose realm runs from Nubia in the south to the north. He put her name beside his own on monuments, something Egyptian kings rarely did for a wife. He built colossal statues where Tiye sits at the very same scale as the pharaoh, not shrunk down at his feet. She stood beside him at his royal jubilees, the great Sed festivals he staged in the final years of his reign to renew his power, shown as his partner in the ceremony rather than a bystander. Then she outlived him, and instead of fading into retirement, she carried her standing straight into the reign of her son. She appears in the art of that radical new court at Amarna, carved dining with the royal family under the long rays of the sun disk, and her son built her a sunshade temple in his new city, a private place of worship reserved for the most important royal women. One relief even shows the aging Queen Mother being led through Akhenaten's new temple to the Aten, and when she died, late in his reign, the erasures of the age reached her too. A gilded wooden shrine her son had made for her was later found dismantled and stacked inside a mysterious tomb we call KV55, with names on it already scratched out. Once again, her image had been caught up in someone else's editing, and when the boldest proof of her standing comes, it comes from outside Egypt entirely. In the clay diplomatic letters we now call the amarna letters, foreign kings wrote to the Egyptian court, and after Amenhotep III died, the king of Mitanni, a ruler named Tushratta, wrote to the new pharaoh and pointed him straight back to his mother. He told him to ask Tiye, because she knew everything that had passed between their 2 countries. A foreign king treated the Queen Mother as the living memory of Egypt's foreign policy. So when we find her portrait physically altered, hidden crown and all, we are not looking at a nobody. We are looking at one of the most documented women of the entire ancient world. Now look at the object itself, because the head is unusual before you even scan it. It was found not in a grand tomb, but at a site called Gurob in the Fayum, on the edge of the desert south of the Nile Delta. Gurob was a royal harem palace town, a place tied closely to the women of the court, and the head entered the Berlin collection in 1905. It is small enough to hold in 2 hands, and that portability is a clue in itself. A head like this was probably a treasured personal image, the kind of object kept close and honored, perhaps even after the person had died, which is exactly the sort of image someone might later feel a need to update. And unlike almost every other royal portrait from Egypt, this one does not flatter her. Egyptian kings and queens were normally carved young and perfect forever. Smooth faces, calm, blank stares, ageless. Tiye's head breaks that rule completely. The mouth turns down at the corners. There are real lines of age around the eyes and the lips. She looks like a specific older woman who lived a long life and carried a great deal of weight, not an idealized goddess with a borrowed face. Scholars still debate whether that is Tiye's true age showing through, or the franker, more honest style that came in around the Amarna period. But either way, the effect is the same. This head feels like a real person, and that is the first small mystery, because it suggests the portrait was made to show Tiye as she actually was, with nothing softened. Which makes what came next even harder to explain. Someone took a rare, honest portrait of a powerful queen and then went to real trouble to cover part of it up. Before we get into how they covered it and what the argument is really about, one quick thing. If you like the documented version of these stories, the named scientists, the real dates, and none of the invented history, that is exactly what we do on this channel every couple of days. So it genuinely helps us if you subscribe. All right, back to the head and the layers the scan peeled apart. Here is what the reworking actually looks like, step by step. Because the CT scan does not just show the hidden crown, it shows the order things were added. At the base sits the wooden head, carved with Tiye's real features. Over that, in the first version, went the silver headdress, a close-fitting cloth-shaped covering that Egyptologists call a khat, with the gold cobra fixed at the front. That was Tiye as she was first presented, a queen in silver and gold. Then, at some later point, that first crown was closed off. The silver headdress was left in place. They covered it over, right where it sat. Layers of linen were laid over the silver, and into that linen were set hundreds of tiny faience beads, blue and gold, arranged to read as a rounded cap. And on top of all of it, the tall, separate crown was mounted, the one with the sun disk, the cow horns, and the double feathers. The scan lets us see the silver headdress still sitting there underneath the beadwork, exactly where it always was, sealed under the newer surface. This is not the only object from this period that was reworked. The Amarna age was full of images being carved, defaced, and recut as the religion and the politics lurched around. So a royal portrait being edited after the fact was not unusual. What makes this one land differently is that nothing was destroyed. The original was preserved, whole, and simply hidden. And the timing is the key that unlocks it. The style of that added crown and the way the head was changed point to the years after Amenhotep III had died, when Tiye was an old woman and her son was on the throne as Akhenaten. In other words, the covering happened inside her own family, in her own lifetime, or just after, by the people closest to her. The people who reworked her were her own household, the ones nearest to her, deciding how she would be remembered. So why would they do it? Why take a finished portrait of the queen and rebuild her crown on top of the old one? This is where the honest answer is that we do not fully know, and anyone who tells you it is settled is selling you something. But there is a leading explanation, and it is a strong one. Look at what the new crown actually is. The sun disk, the cow horns, the double plumes. That is the headgear of a goddess, the crown tied to Hathor and to the divine figures connected with the sun. And this is where a place far to the south becomes important. Down in Nubia, at a site called Sedeinga, Amenhotep III built an entire temple dedicated to Tiye herself, where she was honored in the form of a solar goddess linked to Hathor. So even while she was alive, the machinery to treat this queen as divine already existed in stone, hundreds of miles up the Nile. Then under Akhenaten, Egypt's whole religion was being rebuilt around the sun disk. The Aten, and Tiye, the king's mother, seems to have been pulled deeper into that new divine world. On that reading, the covering was an act of elevation. The first version showed a mortal queen, and the people around her wanted to present something higher, a woman already halfway to a goddess. The Berlin Museum itself leans toward this kind of explanation, that the head was reworked to lift Tiye's status after her husband's death, and the temple at Sedeinga backs it up. But notice what it still leaves open. It explains the new crown. It does not fully explain why they buried a precious silver one instead of simply carving a fresh head, and it rests on reading intentions we can never hear the people say out loud. So the museum label gives you the likely reason. The scan quietly reminds you the reason is still an argument. And that argument does not stop at the crown, because Tiye is one of those figures where almost every basic question has a second layer under it, the same way the head does. Take her origins. Because her features in this and other portraits look different from the standard royal template, there has been a long debate about Tiye's ancestry, with some scholars arguing for foreign roots and others insisting her family was Egyptian, tied to the town of Akhmim. Her parents, Yuya and Tuya, are real. Their mummies survive in remarkable condition, and even they have been pulled into the same argument about how Egyptian the family truly was. So the woman under the hidden crown is also a woman under a question mark about her own bloodline. And then there is her body. For decades, one of the royal mummies from a hidden cache in the Valley of the Kings, a woman nicknamed the Elder Lady, sat completely unidentified. Ancient priests had moved her long ago to protect the royal dead from tomb robbers, and in the shuffle, she lost her name. What finally gave it back was a piece of evidence tucked inside another famous tomb. A small, nested coffinette in Tutankhamun's burial held a lock of hair, and that lock was inscribed with Tiye's name. In a 2010 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, a team led by the Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass compared that hair and ran DNA across the royal mummies, and the elder lady came back as Tiye, Tut's grandmother, sitting in the family tree exactly where she should be. Parts of that DNA work are still debated by other specialists, but the identification of the elder lady as Tiye is widely accepted. So science has pulled this queen out of the dark twice. Once from under the surface of a wooden head, and once from an unlabeled body on a museum shelf, using a curl of her own hair that her grandson's tomb had kept safe for more than 3,000 years. Put all of that together, and here is where we actually stand. The face millions of people photograph in Berlin is a deliberate overwrite. Under the beaded cap and the goddess crown, the queen's first silver headdress is still there, cobra and all, exactly as the CT scan found it, published by Dorothea Arnold back in 1996 and hiding in plain sight ever since. We know who covered it, her own family, in the strange years when her son was tearing down the old gods and a temple in Nubia was already treating her as divine. We know the leading reason, that they were lifting a mortal queen toward the sun. What we still do not have is Tiye's own voice telling us that is why, or a settled answer on her origins. And both of those blanks sit in the same quiet room where you can walk up and look her in the eyes today. If a hidden crown under one royal portrait is what a single scan can reveal, it is worth asking what else is still sitting under the surface of the faces we think we already know. And there is one more scanned Egyptian face where the official story and the evidence do not line up, which is exactly where we are going next.